got what all the rest lack. Everyone wants to back Jack. Jack is on the right track.
At the end of World War II, the two reigning superpowers were the United Soviet Socialist Republic and the United States of America, one communist and one capitalist, both equipped with nuclear weapons. Writer George Orwell described the atmosphere at the time as a war with no fighting. He called it a Cold War. This period lasted from 1947 to 1991, which it was the beginning of the end for the USSR. From the late 1940s through the late 1960s, the fear of the American people began to escalate. The bomb shelters were built, and children were trained to be ready for the bomb when it was dropped. Tension was at its highest in the 1960s when President Kennedy was elected.
He knew just what to do. He'd duck and cover, duck and cover. He'd hide his head and tail and 4 little feet. He'd duck and cover.
The rights and responsibilities of the deployment of nuclear weapons falls on President of the United States. During the Cold War, such responsibilities fell upon President John F. Kennedy. The Bay of Pigs was an unsuccessful invasion of Cuban exiles backed by the United States. The Bay of Pigs first started when President Eisenhower approved the plan to overthrow Castro's communist government on 17 March 1960. When President John F. Kennedy was a president-elect, he was informed of the plans to overthrow Castro on January 1961. On April 1960, the CIA started to recruit anti-Castro Cuban exiles. Castro already knew of the invasion via his secret intelligence network. Nevertheless, sabotage attempts were made days before the invasion to slow down the preparations for the invasion. On April 14th and 15th, a diversionary landing was planned near Baracoa, consisting of about 164 Cuban exiles, commanded by Higino Nino Diaz. On April 15th, 1961, 90 minutes after the 8 B-26s took off, another B-26 took off on a deception flight heading towards Florida. On 10:30 a.m. April 15th, the Cuban Foreign Minister Raul Roa accused the United States of aggressive air attacks on Cuba. In response, U.S. Ambassador to UN Aldai Stevenson stated that U.S. armed forces would not intervene in Cuba. On the night 16th and 17th of April, a mock diversionary landing was organized by the CIA operatives near Bahia Honda, Pinar del Rio province. At about midnight, April 17th, two CIs and an underwater demolition team of 5 frogmen entered the Bay of Pigs. On April 20th, the invasion of Cuba failed. The failed invasion severely embarrassed the Kennedy administration and made Castro wary of future U.S. intervention in Cuba. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a 14-day confrontation in October 1962 between the Soviet Union and Cuba on one side, and the United States on the other. The crisis is generally regarded as the moment in which the Cold War came closest to turning into a nuclear conflict. In May 1962, Nikita Khrushchev had the idea of placing nuclear weapons on Cuba to deter any future invasion attempt. While the negotiations to remove the missiles were taking place, several Soviet ships attempted to run the blockade, increasing tensions to the point that orders were sent out to the U.S. Navy ships to fire a warning shot, then open fire. President John F. Kennedy had the responsibility to keep the American public safe. He also had the right to fire missiles when needed. Making the first move towards Cuba was a risky tactical maneuver, which we will never know how it would have affected Kennedy's political career because he was assassinated a little over a year later.
Everyone is voting for Jack, 'cause he's got what all the rest lack.